Welcome back to Mindset Rebuild. It's another deep dive, and I'm Alan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca.
And we're really excited today to be digging into some pretty fascinating ideas, especially if you're a leader, entrepreneur, someone who's really looking to, kind of level up in how you approach your work, your life, really just stepping more into that calm, that visionary CEO role.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're new to Mindset Rebuild, it's, kind of our home base for sharing these ideas and strategies, helping you really rewire for that kind of leadership. You can find us over at mindsetrebuild.substack.com.
Yeah, definitely check that out. And today we're diving into some wisdom from Intrinsic Coach Warren, and I think you're going to find this particularly relevant, especially in today's world.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it, right? We're constantly bombarded with this message of hustle, go, 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 produce, produce, produce. It's like we're all supposed to be these tireless machines.
Right, exactly. Always on, always optimizing, always pushing.
Yeah, and Intrinsic Coach Warren, he kind of flips that script in a really interesting way. He actually suggests that we look to machines, specifically robots, for a lesson in productivity.
Okay, that's kind of counterintuitive. How does that work?
Well, he starts by pointing out that even the most sophisticated robots, right, these incredibly complex systems, they need downtime. They have to recalibrate, they have to recharge. It's built into their design.
And we tend to think, oh, that's a machine thing, right? Like we're humans, we can just power through.
Exactly. We wear that busyness as a badge of honor almost, I'm so busy, I'm so productive, but Intrinsic Coach Warren is really challenging that mentality.
So what's the problem with that? Like
Yeah.
what happens when we just keep pushing, keep going without those resets, those pauses?
Well, think about a time when you're working on something complex, a challenging problem, you're mentally fatigued, you're just kind of banging your head against the wall.
Oh yeah, I've definitely been there.
Yeah. Right. And what happens? You're rereading the same paragraph over and over, you're making silly mistakes, your focus is shot.
Totally. It's like you're stuck in this mental fog.
Exactly. And Intrinsic Coach Warren, he calls this cognitive overload. And it's not just about feeling tired, it actually impacts our ability to think clearly, to make good decisions. It creates this mental clutter that just prevents us from moving forward effectively.
And when we think about the whole idea of mindset rebuild, right? This vision of being that calm, that visionary CEO, clarity is essential.
It's fundamental. You can't lead effectively. You can't make strategic decisions when you're mentally exhausted, when your bandwidth is completely maxed out.
So what does Intrinsic Coach Warren suggest? What's the antidote to this cognitive overload?
He introduces this concept of a micro-maintenance reset. And I love this idea because it's so practical, it's so actionable.
Okay, so when I hear reset, I think, like a week-long vacation, a digital detox, something pretty drastic.
Yeah. Right. But he's not talking about anything like that. These are short, structured, intentional breaks that you can weave into your day, almost like hitting a pause button on your mental processes.
Okay, so mini resets throughout the day. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. And the goal here, as Intrinsic Coach Warren explains it, is to kind of clear out that cognitive cache, right, that builds up. It's to recalibrate your mental system, re-engage those executive functions, those higher level thinking skills we need for strategic decision making.
And ultimately, it's about bringing your attention back to what truly matters in that moment, right? Like, what's the most important thing for me to be focusing on right now?
Precisely. And to make this even more actionable, he breaks it down into this really practical 3-step R.E.S.E.T loop.
Yeah. Okay. I'm intrigued. Let's break that down. Step 1. What's that?
Step 1 is recognize the lag. So this is about developing that awareness of when your mental engine is starting to sputter, before you hit that wall of complete burnout.
So how do we actually recognize that? What are some signs?
He gives some really, really practical indicators. Maybe you're finding your attention wandering more easily, you're making more careless mistakes, rereading the same email multiple times without really absorbing the information.
Right. It's like that feeling of mental sluggishness, like you're just not quite firing on all cylinders.
Exactly. And to help with this recognition phase, Intrinsic Coach Warren suggests a really simple but effective strategy. He says set a subtle timer every 90 minutes.
Oh, okay. Like a little reminder to check in with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about dropping everything the second that timer goes off, but it's that prompt to pause and ask yourself, okay, How am I feeling mentally right now? Am I starting to feel that drag, that fatigue setting in?
I love that. Just a little nudge to bring that awareness to the forefront.
Right. And once you've tuned into those signals, you can move on to step 2, which is execute a micro reset.
Okay, so what does that look like? What are we actually doing during this micro reset?
Well, first of all, Intrinsic Coach Warren emphasizes that these resets are brief. We're talking just 2 to 5 minutes.
Wow, that's a surprisingly small amount of time.
It is, right. And yet he argues that even that short pause can have a significant impact. And he offers some really concrete examples. Step away from your computer screen, take a few deep intentional breaths, maybe do some gentle stretches, just to release that physical tension that often builds up when we're mentally taxed.
Or even just looking out the window, right? Like shifting your gaze, giving your eyes and your mind a bit of a break from the screen.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite examples that he gives is what he calls the 3x3 reset.
Okay, what's that?
It's so simple. 3 deep breaths, 3 gentle shoulder rolls, and then 3 minutes of silence. That's it.
It's amazing how powerful those simple things can be, right? Like
Yeah.
just that conscious act of slowing down, tuning in.
It's profound. And what I love about the 3x3 reset is that you can do it anywhere, anytime. In your office, between meetings, on the go. It doesn't require any special equipment or a dedicated space. It's just about that intentional shift in your attention.
I love it. So we've recognized the lag, we've executed our micro reset. What's the final step?
The final step is set your next focus point. So after you've taken that pause, you've cleared your mental slate, you come back with this renewed clarity.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely see how that would be beneficial.
And Intrinsic Coach Warren explains that this clarity helps us to combat something called decision fatigue. That feeling of being completely drained by having to make constant choices throughout the day.
Oh yeah. And I think as leaders, as entrepreneurs, we're constantly bombarded with decisions big and small,
Absolutely. And this step also helps to reduce the cognitive friction of what's called context switching, that constant jumping back and forth between different tasks.
which can be so draining, so
Yeah.
mentally taxing.
It really is. And to help with this focus piece, Intrinsic Coach Warren offers a really powerful question to ask yourself. He says, what's the one thing I'm doing for the next 25 minutes?
Okay, so it's about really honing in on that single most important task for that specific block of time.
Exactly. It's about bringing that laser focus to your work after you've had that mental breather.
I love that. So we've walked through the 3 steps of the R.E.S.E.T loop, but why does this work? Like what's the science behind it?
Well, Intrinsic Coach Warren points out that our brains, as incredible as they are, they're not designed for sustained, continuous operation. He uses this really helpful analogy of our mental energy being like a battery.
Okay, I can see that.
Just like a battery, our mental energy gets depleted by all these demands that we face throughout the day, multitasking, distractions, stress, all of it.
And we wouldn't expect a battery to run indefinitely without recharging, right? So why would we expect that of our brains?
Exactly. And Intrinsic Coach Warren even cites some really interesting research to support this idea. Studies that have shown how these brief intentional breaks can actually restore cognitive control, improve accuracy on tasks.
So it's not just, anecdotal, there's actual science backing this up.
Exactly. And it all ties back to that robot analogy that we started with. These highly efficient machines, they're programmed with periods of operation and scheduled pauses to optimize their performance, to prevent errors.
And we can learn from that, right? Like we can apply that same principle to how we approach our work, our lives.
Absolutely. And beyond the cognitive benefits, Intrinsic Coach Warren also highlights some other really compelling advantages for us personally. He talks about a noticeable drop in stress hormone levels when we incorporate these micro resets.
Which makes sense, right? Like we're giving our nervous system a chance to calm down, to regulate.
Exactly. And he also points to increased sustained attention and improved ability to prioritize tasks, which are both things that suffer when we're in that state of cognitive overload.
So it's not just about being more productive. It's also about feeling better, reducing stress, feeling more in control.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really crucial point to emphasize. These short cognitive resets, they're not a luxury. They're not a waste of time.
They're an investment.
They are. They're an investment in our productivity, in our well-being, in our ability to show up as those calm, those visionary leaders that we aspire to be.
So how do we actually start implementing this? Like, what's a good first step for our listeners?
Well, Intrinsic Coach Warren actually issues a very specific challenge, and I think it's a great place to start. He encourages us to implement the R.E.S.E.T loop at least twice today. Maybe once mid-morning, once mid-afternoon.
Okay, so just those two little mini breaks throughout the day.
Exactly, and he emphasizes that it's a minimal time commitment, probably less than 10 minutes total.
And yet the potential payoff, as we've been discussing, is huge.
It is. It's about unlocking those hours of sharper, more focused thinking, reducing that stress, and ultimately being more effective in everything we do.
And his closing message, it's so powerful. He says, "You're not built for endless output. You're built for cycles of brilliance."
I love that. It's such a paradigm shift, right?
Yeah.
Moving away from that old model of constant linear productivity to a more sustainable, a more human-centered approach.
And his postscript, he uses this great analogy. He says, "Treat your brain like a high-performance Formula One engine, not like a neglected rental car running on fumes."
Right, like our mental capacity, it's our most valuable asset. And
Mhm.
and it requires that intentional care, that attention, those strategic micro resets to perform at its peak.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Intrinsic Coach Warren's wisdom, I think the key takeaway for our listeners is this. By incorporating these strategic micro resets, taking a cue from the way even advanced technology manages performance, we can significantly enhance our focus, our decision making, our overall mental clarity.
And the beauty of the R.E.S.E.T loop, right? Recognize the lag, execute a micro reset, and set your next focus point is that it's so simple, it's so actionable, it's something you can start doing right now, today.
And as we always say here at Mindset Rebuild, it's all about stepping into that role of the calm, the visionary CEO of your own life. And these intentional pauses, inspired by Intrinsic Coach Warren, they're a tangible step in that direction.
And it begs the question, right? How many breakthroughs, how many moments of insight are waiting for us just on the other side of a deliberate pause? What could become clearer? What could we achieve if we just took a few moments to reset, to recharge?
It's a powerful question to reflect on. And for more insights, more practical strategies to help you on that journey of rewiring your mindset, of cultivating that calm, visionary leadership, be sure to subscribe to Mindset Rebuild over at mindsetrebuild.substack.com.
We'll be back with another deep dive soon.
Until then, take care.
Bye for now.